Hello, everybody. I am S.N. Chakraborty today discussing on realism, an important concept of comparative politics. Perhaps realism is the most influential approach to international relations in post-World War II politics. It has immensely contributed to enrich the ideas of national interest, national security, balance of power, national power, and particularly after the Ukraine and Russia conflict has broken out in last February in 2022. The concept of realism has renewed or regained its importance in world politics. This has also challenged the liberal argument that democratic countries normally don't opt for war. But in this case, both Ukraine and Russia are having democratic systems. They have representative governments, and elected government are ruling in both the states. Realist approach can be broadly divided into two major schools of thought. One is classical realism, another is neo-realism. Though it is known that Morgenthau has pioneered a realist approach or developed it as a theory, but there was realist thought even in ancient time. For example, in Sun Tzu's military art of war, or Kautilya's mandala theory, and later Machiavelli's power concept, all actually belonging to the same school of thought of realism, that is power-centric. But what Morgenthau has done, he has systematically developed this approach. He structured its analysis in a way so that realism has become an important theory of international relations or comparative politics. And what he has done, he has linked it with human nature. Since human nature is greedy, by nature, and when the same human being comes to rule the state, then that greediness over power that reflects in states functioning also. That is what Morgenthau basically wanted to argue. Now, since state is controlled and managed by human being, then definitely power becomes the primary or main thrust of nation state. So, according to Morgenthau, war becomes inevitable in the functioning of nation state. In between, when war does not take place, actually there is balance of power. And during the balance of power, there may be tension, there may be war-like situation, but not truly a war. During this period, actually all these states try to accumulate more weaponry, more power, basically military power, and when finally that balance of power between nations that breaks out, then war becomes inevitable. And according to the realists, war will return at regular intervals in international politics. In between, there may be a period, can be short, can be long, the period of peace and tranquility. But that doesn't mean that war possibility disappears forever. Neoclassical realists, they also accept the importance of power in nation-state system. But what they say, that definitely that states' hunger for power is not necessarily a reflection of human nature. And human nature may not be always power greedy. In alternative to what Morgenthau argued, they say it happens because there is no international government above the sovereign nation state, which can govern and control the behavior of a sovereign nation state. This is what they called is an anarchic system, because there is no power hierarchy between nation state and there is no international government. United Nations may be an international body, but this is not equivalent to a government. And therefore, what happens that finally the onus of protecting self-interest, that is national interest, national security, that lies with the nation state itself. According to Kenneth Walls, the neo-realist, therefore the state builds up its military power not essentially to wage war against another state, but rather to protect itself or its national security and national interest from the possible aggression and threat of the other countries. There is another neo-realist called John Miyashima. He takes another view. He says, no, it happens otherwise. Since there is no international structure and everybody has to evolve its own survival mechanism, therefore what happens, it tries to woo away the possible threat and danger by showing that it is actually a very powerful state. And that way it tries to give an impression that I have enough military power, and if you try to attack me, then I will retaliate, I will not give you up. So therefore, every country, instead of taking a defensive position, which Kenneth Walls says, it actually takes an offensive position, and for that offensive position, not essentially to wage a war, they build up military power and the stock of weaponry. John Miyashima has recently given a series of talks and lectures on Ukraine-Russia war, where he explains that Western power, they took their military bloc called NATO as close as possible towards the Russia and China. And they had placed NATO centers at different places, and they also wanted to take it to Ukraine. So this is what John Muir says, offensive. Now on the other side, now Russia cannot accept it if Ukraine is having NATO base. Therefore, Russia also diplomatically has been offensive for quite some time. And a lot of tension was mounting over this issue over the years. Then finally, Russia became also offensive, and a hostility in Ukraine started, and therefore Ukraine became the battlefield of the war to settle the offensiveness of the Western power and Russia. So this is what Miyashima explains. Therefore, what happens that neoclassicals is divided into two approaches. One is defensive realism, which Kenneth Walls advocates, and John Miyashima talks about offensive realism. However, liberal thinkers are always strongly against realist thoughts. They would again argue that only way to settle dispute is dialogue and negotiation, and that is how for 70 years a world war could be averted, and many more small war possibilities could be averted through the intervention of international organizations and various way of strengthening diplomacy, not essentially political diplomacy, it can be cultural diplomacy, it can be many forms of diplomacy. So that is what liberal would say. And liberal would also say that if the countries are more democratic, more republic, then possibility of war will certainly reduce. When a country goes for war, then there may be a change in the democratic process, and maybe some amount of autocratic formation has taken place in those countries. That is what liberal would strongly argue. Even the feminist, they will also say that realist is basically the advocates of patriarchy. that power, war, these are all, male chauvinism. And that is what reflects in realist theories. So therefore, feminists are also a strong critic of realism. So realist debates or approach does not end here. There is also neoclassical approach which is promoted by Farid Zakaria, Rose Gideon and others. There is also a third world concept of realism which is explained by Muhammad Ayub. And therefore what we find that there are many approaches within realism, and it is not that one is replacing another approach, but they exist simultaneously, and all together is the school of realism. So any UPSC aspirant has to know realism in totality, all the approaches, including that neoclassical and third world approach, and then they must know that how to blend them in your answer, okay? And that is how the preparation must go. And I believe if somebody is ready with that, they will be able to answer questions on realism very well. At the end, one must keep it in mind that realism means power. It cannot be deviated from the power thrust. Now, the power can be human nature, the power can be the absence of international institution or anarchic situation, power can be leadership, power can be new thrust to participate in international politics, international relations. So there can be various approaches within that, but finally power remains the central focus of all realism. So thank you very much. I hope this brief introduction will help you to develop your preparation on realism further. So thank you. Thank you very much.